Gulati. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Microsoft, covering in our cloud data and AI space, covering SQL Server and Azure Data Services. And I'm joined by Kevin from engineering. Kevin, if you want to quickly introduce yourself before we get started.
I'm a principal program manager in the data platform team. Been working around databases in Microsoft for about 14 years now. So a lot of dusty corners.
Yeah. So what we wanted to talk to you about today was, kind of the trends that we're seeing at Microsoft. Share with you how Microsoft is investing in the areas of cloud data and AI. Why is it investing the way it is? And then tell you a little bit about our products and services across both on-premises and our cloud data services. So with that, let's get started. So a little bit of background, some trends that we're noticing in terms of, how the world is changing. And hopefully, I think you might agree that you're seeing similar trends within your industry, within your geography. So three core areas that we've noticed. One, the growth of data. If we can just go back one slide. So if we can, the growth of data is growing astronomically. I don't think anybody on the call will argue if I ask you the question, in the last 5 years, has your data shrunk? Most of you will say no, it's grown significantly at an X factor. And so that's one key trend that we're seeing, the massive growth of data. Okay, then the other part, this is interesting. Both Kevin and I have been here for a while, and we meet with customers all over the world. And the second bubble that you see, we're showing and we're capturing this trend of 80% of organizations are now adopting cloud-first strategies. Whereas 5 years ago, this number would have been much, much smaller. And the last area is this increased investment recently in the area of AI. But if you recall, AI is the models that you build, the AI models that you build are only as good as the data that they sit on, right? So the things are very integrated, and so these are the three core trends that we're observing and that are guiding how we invest at Microsoft. So hopefully, from your perspective, you're seeing similar things within your organization, how to manage data growth, how to think about cloud, and then also this concept of AI, which is a hot topic, but how do I get there where you're going from hindcasting, which is, kind of thinking about your business based on historical data, to actually forecasting, which is modeling and being able to predict where your business is going to go. Kevin, do you want to add anything?
One interesting comment relative to the middle bubble, talking about organizations moving to cloud-first strategy. Our CVP of engineering, Rohan Kumar, has in a lot of conferences now, he'll stand up in front of thousands of people and do a quick hands-up poll saying, okay, raise your hand if you're never going to move your data off your premise, if it's always going to be within your walls, no cloud, anything. And maybe 5 or 10% of the hands go up. And okay, now raise your hand if you're intending to move all of your data into the cloud and get rid of your on-premise data centers. And there's about 5 or 10% of the hands that go up there. But the vast majority of those hands go up when he asks if your 5-year plan is to have some of your data on-premise and some of your data in the cloud. So that has shifted radically over the last few years. 3 or 4 years ago, that would have been very few percentage moving to the cloud at all.
Yeah, and so that's and that informs these patterns. What our customers are doing informs both our marketing and engineering strategy, right? So one theme, and we'll talk about this as we go further along, this concept of hybrid, right? That your data will be on premises, it will be in the cloud. How do you reason over that data? How do you solve problems when your data is in multiple data centers? Some you control, some third-party providers control. So that's how you keep it from being separate, isolated. Yes, data, because that doesn't help you in making good business decisions. So let's continue and talk about, so one of the other things that we did, this was, I want to say about 14 to 16 months ago, we worked with, and you'll see this notion, organizations that harness cloud data and AI outperform, but what is the basis behind that? So we worked with research firm to conduct a study with, I think it was 350 enterprise customers. This is just a sample set of the companies this third-party research firm spoke to give you an idea, just the type of customers they talked to. But what did they talk to the customers? They basically asked like 75 to 80 questions to assess the customer's maturity in the areas of cloud computing, advanced data technologies, things like in-memory technology, advanced concepts with data, relational, non-relational, scaling data, things like this, and AI. And that spectrum was, hey, are you still doing, kind of traditional reporting based on your historical data, which is what I was alluding to earlier, where you're making business decisions based on only historical data, or are you moving along that path where you've actually built in machine learning models that actually can give you intelligence so you can forecast? And so that was kind of the spectrum. And I'm giving you a summary of what those roughly 80 or 75 to 80 questions look like, but they did that assessment. So the next thing the research firm did, it was to basically categorize these companies into 4 quadrants and assess based on maturity, and then look for patterns. And it was very interesting, the patterns they found. There were some very, very clear patterns comparing those customers, let's say in financial services, that were more mature in the areas of cloud, data, and AI versus those in that very same segment, customers that are less mature, more at a basic stage when it comes to AI, when it comes to cloud computing or advanced data technologies. And what was interesting was that, what did they find?
They're looking for patterns. If you have customers that are out in that quadrant where they're the most advanced on all these dimensions, what can you say about them as business entities? How do they perform business-wise?
Yep. So in this case, what I would do is I would really focus your eyes on the bottom 2 words on both of the text there versus the $100 million, because remember, they talk to commercial banks and they also talk to smaller companies. So to a commercial bank, $100 million in additional operating income may not be a lot, but to a smaller company, that might be a lot. So, but the interesting thing was that the pattern they consistently found was the companies that were more mature and investing more in cloud computing environments, advanced data technologies, and making their progression towards AI and modeling and forecasting based on their data were doing significantly better consistently in operating margin and operating income consistently. And this was a consistent pattern. And by the way, the study is published, and we can share that link with you after the presentation as well. But it was very interesting to note, because many of you are probably on the fence and thinking about this and going, well, either you might be well on your way in embracing these 3 areas and advancing your technical capabilities in those 3 areas, but is there a reward on the other side? And what this study shows is there's a clear pattern, right? And it makes sense because you gain efficiencies when you embrace cloud. You gain more intelligence when you embrace AI. As you advance and take advantage of more sophisticated data, well, the better your AI. So logically, it makes sense that there should be a pattern and a result to those efforts. So this study just shows that that is true. So then the other part that the study looked at was, okay, well, we got these companies in this kind of more advanced quadrant. What else is there that we're noticing? And what was interesting was they were noticing patterns of companies that were kind of innovative in a space. And I'll just, for time's sake, give you one example. Hopefully, since many of you are from the United States, will be familiar with DocuSign.
DocuSign's not about US only anymore.
Yeah, they're global, but hopefully most of you have heard of this company. Now think about this company, right? They have literally transformed how we sign contracts. Think about how we used to sign contracts 5, 7, 8 years ago. It has become seamless now. It's more secure, it's faster, and this is a company, and Kevin will kind of share this story a bit more, but I'll give you kind of an overview. They're an absolute innovator. They're disrupting their industry by re-innovating how we think about doing contracts.
Why does it matter that they're innovators? Each of these companies has disrupted their market niche. So Jet with on-the-moment pricing, DocuSign with their electronic signatures, Honeywell with intelligent environment controls. By being out in front and by being the innovator, they own those markets. So it's not just, well, they got there first, okay, but the result of that is they own that industry.
Well, and what's interesting to note is all of these companies are moving a step forward. And I'll give you an example of DocuSign. Probably most of you or many of you may not know that their backbone is built on SQL Server. And they started to modernize to newer versions of SQL Server because of the performance gains that they saw, the new AI capabilities that they saw, a lot of advancements. And we'll showcase some of those to you. But look, even their journey, as we're talking through this, has advanced. So they said, okay, we love SQL, we love the performance we're getting, we love the value we're getting. How do we get even more scale, more cost effectively?
I worked with DocuSign for an extended period, getting SQL to perform up to their requirements, because they have very stringent performance requirements. Their standard servers, a 2-socket machine with only Fusion IO storage, so only PCIe attached storage, very fast servers. And they keep all that hardware busy, and they expect us to perform up to it. So we did a lot of enhancements in the SQL Server product to be able to keep up with their performance needs. They're now in the final stages of moving their whole operation into Azure, and they're confident that we will have the availability, the uptime, and the performance to meet their needs.
Part of that is the design point. So going back to the principles, what are we learning from our customers, and how are we bringing that into our design strategy? How we're optimizing and designing for hybrid, like Kevin spoke to. One of the key things that DocuSign loves is that SQL Server that they love on-prem. They not only can migrate that to infrastructure services, which any provider, Oracle can do that, IBM can do that. You can lift and shift that into an IaaS environment, but nobody else can take that on-prem, fully large-scale workload and lift and shift it to a PaaS environment, a fully managed service, which is the path that they're moving to that Kevin's talking about, right? Again, because of these learnings, we have designed kind of cloud optimized into the platform.
When we talk about IaaS and PaaS, IaaS, infrastructure as a service, is the idea of just having VMs in the cloud, which many providers do, and you can install SQL in the VM and stand up your database. PaaS, platform as a service, is the database as your service. So instead of logging into a VM, you just have a connection to a database.
And then continuing on, so the final portion of the study, so where this firm went in and asked, well, how are you thinking about your data state? And I think Kevin alluded to this a bit earlier. What is your 5-year plan of how your data looks like? And this is a very simple kind of architecture diagram, but it speaks to the truth of what customers are telling us, which is, look, they want to be able to ingest any kind of data. That's not their problem. That's the vendor that they pick's problem. I want to ingest any kind of data, relational, non-relational, structured, unstructured. I don't care. I will decide where it goes. Certain workloads will be behind my firewall in a private cloud-like environment. Other workloads, I'm willing to lift and shift to the public cloud. Other customers are saying, you know what? Like Kevin said, we are shutting down our data centers. We're moving everything to a public cloud environment. How are you going to help us? So the key thing, the majority of the customers want is a hybrid environment. They envision a hybrid environment, not just now, 5 years from now. And the data stores, they're expanding. It used to be, 5-10 years ago, primarily operational relational data, but now they have unstructured data. Well, that doesn't go in an operational database. That might go in a data lake, sensor data, IoT data. So you've got to have data stores, and you've got to have, synergy between how these data stores work in the cloud and on premises. Otherwise, hybrid doesn't work. And then the last piece of this is, what do customers really want to go do with this data once it's in these environments? And the number one reason we get is, look, we want to be able to reason over this data anywhere. Can you make that simpler for us, Microsoft? And that's what we're architecting towards, and we'll talk about this. Flexibility and choice. 5-10 years ago, you might have said, hey, you know what? God, Microsoft only works on Windows, or they don't support a lot of these other open source technologies. Look at Microsoft today. That is not the case. Not even SQL Server. SQL Server runs on Windows and Linux just as well. You get to develop in the language you want. If you don't want to use .NET and you want to use Java because you were an Oracle developer, no problem. You can use SQL Server and develop in Java. Language isn't a problem. The tools work in multiple environments. Where you deploy, Linux, Windows, doesn't matter. You want to develop on a Mac, and instead of a Windows machine, no problem. That's what we mean when we say this is an area of massive investment at Microsoft, and that's an area you're going to continue to see more and more investments if you're following the news.
Are the three pillars within the engineering organization for our investment. So this is where we're focused in the data platform engineering team, all of both the on-premise and in the cloud, which is actually all one engineering team.
Yep. And the other interesting point is on the security and performance, results speak for it, and we'll showcase as we go further benchmarks, not just in on-premises solutions, but also in the cloud solutions. How are we outperforming our competitors, our cloud competitors, as well as our traditional on-premises competitors like Oracle? So now you at least have a view of how are we thinking about the space, how are we investing our dollars? Okay, so let's take a look. Let's start with on-premises. Let's share with you how SQL Server has evolved. And I'll move to this slide because I think it does a good job of illustrating how much SQL Server can do. And I think the one thing I would hope that when you think about SQL Server, and many of you probably have SQL, you might have older versions of SQL. The one thing I would love for you to take away from SQL Server is that it's not just a database anymore. If you're using it just simply as a relational operational database, you're not actually taking advantage of all of the capabilities we've added. It's essentially almost like our data platform. It can do everything you want to go do with data. So starting with the left-hand side, choice of language is no longer an issue, and I spoke to this earlier. Choice of the language you want to use, where you want to deploy, not an issue. Linux, Docker containers, fully supported. Performance, and Kevin can speak to these benchmarks, but if you look at both the read and write performance of SQL Server, TPCH is a read measure, TPCE is a write measure, you will see not only that SQL Server tops these benchmarks, but look at the hardware it's running on. The price performance, it also does very, very well in. And Kevin, do you want to speak a little bit to this?
Also has a metric of dollars per TPC measurement. And that's one of the things we keep an eye on, because that encompasses, it's one thing to have a really, really fast database, but if it costs $1 billion for the hardware, that's not really a practical thing. And so we pay attention to the all-up solution. What does it get you and for how much? Also, scale. There's a history of people thinking of SQL Server as, okay, well, that's the departmental. And that was true maybe 5 or 10 years ago. It's not at all the case at this point. So the data warehousing benchmarks, where we hold the records on most of them, we've published 1 terabyte, 10 terabyte, 30 terabyte, and there's a team of people working on the next generation past that. So it's not a small scale product by any means. We can handle pretty much any size workload you want.
So when it comes to security, and actually you could, this slide probably could be refreshed. It's now over the last 8 years, and then we have data through 2017 showcasing that SQL Server is the most secure database. Again, what is this based on? This is the Institute of Technology's survey that they do on vulnerabilities, and it consistently shows that SQL Server has the least number of vulnerabilities. You might go, Ramneek, well, why does vulnerabilities matter? So if you think back, many of you might remember the Equifax issue breach that had happened, and probably, I don't know if many of you realize this, that wasn't an advanced encryption technology that got hacked. What that was is simply a vulnerability that didn't get patched in time and exposed the data. And so if you think about that, how important is it to have a database that is deployed more than any other database in the commercial database in the world, but also having that engine that is so secure. And this is not a feature capability. This is engineering practices that Kevin can speak to on why we've landed consistently over the last 8 years in this top spot.
So for a long time within the SQL engineering team, security has been just a core premise of how we do engineering. So no feature gets added into the product until it's had a full security review. And that means that the developers have to create a full threat model. What are, for this new surface area, what are all the ways that somebody could possibly come in and attack it? And how have I mitigated it and made sure that none of those attacks can be successful? That then gets reviewed by a set of engineers outside of that development team that specialize in security, and some of them specialize in how do you hack into systems. They're looking for any holes that the developer might have missed, and they'll send it back. Okay, you got to mitigate this issue. So this is all core to our engineering practices. The other thing about the vulnerabilities is, okay, we have the fewest number of vulnerabilities. That's nice. It says a lot to how secure this product is, but it also factors into availability and the number of outages you have to take to patch the software, because every time you get one of these vulnerabilities, that means you got to back down and apply the patches. So
there's operational efficiencies to be gained as well beyond
exactly
is what you're saying. Yeah, and that's very true. And you know, you'll see other competitors here. You'll even see HANA, which is pretty close. But remember, HANA has only been around a few years, a couple of years, maybe 3 now through this year, and yet it has more vulnerabilities than SQL does over the last 8. So just want to make sure the other ones have been around for a little bit longer, just so you have that comparison. The other part, so many of you may or may not realize this, but if you're thinking about doing machine learning models, you want to do real-time analytics, meaning you want to apply those models to your transactional data. You can do that with SQL Server because it has AI built in. You can use R models, you can use Python models, and you can now also, with 2017, do native T-SQL scoring. Did you want to add anything there, Kevin?
Right. So for a long time, the idea of doing any kind of analytics on your live operational data was anathema. You just never would do that, right? We've invested a lot of work, I've been involved in that, to be able to have an operational data store and be able to do analytic queries across that operational data without impacting the workloads in either direction. There's a lot, I could spend the whole hour just talking about that. But the impact of that is that you're able to get insights and intelligence on up to the second data, rather than looking at data from yesterday or the day before the last ETL cycle ran. So what does that mean to a business, dollars and cents? It means that if you're looking at adjusting prices, if you're looking at a big sale event, you know, Black Friday, something like that, if you find out, if you can watch the trends during the day, you can make adjustments on the fly, rather than waiting till the day's over, you do your ETL and say, oh, if I had tweaked this price, I could have sold double the number of units. That's too late. So this is why that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, a lot of commercial firms, retail firms this is one of the reasons they're embracing AI. Like, how do I be more dynamic to my customers' needs?
The other thing is that we're the only platform that allows you to do the AI scoring. So that's where you get the actual results and the correlations within the AI frameworks within the database engine. So within the SQL Server engine, you're actually running the R and Python scripts to do that scoring against the live data, rather than having to do an extract to a separate data engine and then doing your scoring there.
Yep. And the last piece is, you know, many of you have used traditional BI capabilities in SQL Server, like reporting services, but hopefully, you know, you may or may not know that SQL Server now, the Enterprise Edition, comes packaged with Power BI Report Server. Right, that's actually included in what you're already buying. So those of you that have Enterprise Edition of SQL Server, 2016, 2017, you actually have in that package Power BI Report Server. What can Power BI Report Server do? Well, one, it can address all of your BI needs. Right, you can connect it to any data source. You can visualize that data. You can create brilliant interactive reports. Everything that you've seen in Power BI demos, if you've seen Power BI demos from Microsoft, you're able to do behind your firewall, and that's already included in SQL Server. And the nice thing is, if you also have a lot of users that want self-service, you can combine it with Power BI in Azure, and the two work seamlessly. They look and interface exactly the same. So just note that again, the approach that we're taking is all of these capabilities, from relational data warehousing, AI capabilities, BI capabilities, pretty much everything you want to go do with data is built into what you're already buying. Right, and this is the point. You might look at that top right-hand side and say, "Well, you're 1/10 the cost of Oracle." How do you explain that, Ramneek? The point here is, you're not. If you had to go get these, Oracle has capabilities like this. So do our other competitors. But you would have to go and get, buy multiple SKUs for each of these capabilities that we talked about. Right, and this is where the over 10x difference comes from. With SQL, this is all built into one SKU, right? And that's the advantage that you're having. And it can run on less expensive hardware. So this is why we've seen this pattern of more and more Oracle customers shifting their estate to SQL Server, right? Especially as the performance capabilities are there. And if you've looked at the Gartner MQs, look at how SQL has become the industry leader the last 3 years in a row. So that's one of the core compelling values of SQL Server. And Kevin, if we can quickly talk about some of the new capabilities we've added to SQL 2017 beyond what we just talked about, then we can move on and talk about our Azure capabilities as well.
Right. So this is just a selection of the capabilities that we added into the product with the 2017 release cycle. We added support for graph data, so you can do graph queries. Graph queries are understanding the relationship between objects, and they're often used for fraud detection, to understand the relationship between people that may not be obvious on the surfaces. There's a lot of different uses for that. This is now core into the engine, the SQL engine. Advanced machine learning with R and Python. Again, native T-SQL scoring means that you can embed the scoring script, the R or Python script, within the T-SQL statement. So it's inline, all done within the engine context. Adaptive query processing and automatic plan correction is work that we've done within the query processing engine to automatically adapt to the situations that it comes across. So if we execute a query and allocate too much memory for it, or not enough, we'll note that and correct it for the next time we do that. We'll adjust the plans so we make the engine self-learning and self-tuning. Cross-platform HA. We released SQL Server on Linux. It's the full product. There's no small subset of it. It's the full SQL Server, and that includes the HA platform. So now you can have a SQL Server running on Windows, having HA replication live to a SQL Server running on Linux. So if there's some OS-specific vulnerability, you've mitigated that as well. Or if you're migrating between platforms, you can bring up a replica on the new platform, keep them in sync for a while, and then retire the old platform. And finally, Agile DevOps. We have full support for SQL in containers with all the orchestration, Kubernetes, and all the other orchestration methods for that. Yeah. So those are some pretty significant changes, and there's a whole raft of smaller enhancements, of course, behind the scenes. And this is within a 2-year cycle. So that speaks to the efficiency of the engineering.
Yeah, and I think you'll speak to that how we're one engineering team with like we talked about, we deployed the cloud first model ourselves within our engineering team, and then we'll explain why we do that and why is it better for you even if you're planning to deploy SQL on premises. So before we get there, I want to quickly go through this. Some of you may be impacted by GDPR. Just note that we have enhanced the security capabilities, the ability to track sensitive data, the ability to be able to take that personal data out, because a lot of this is now user driven, where you have to be able to if the user decides to want to take their data out of, and they might have said yes at first, you can have my data, and that you have to be able to pull it out when they ask. So we've added a bunch of capabilities that protect not only your organization, but also protect your end customer and make your data solution GDPR compliant.
It's going to be a lot of work complying to it. There's a lot of requirements there for European companies or companies that do business with European customers is the scope. The penalties for not complying are pretty draconian. It's percentages of the corporation's all up revenue, which is a hefty price tag. It's a lot of work to be done, but Microsoft having a lot of its own products out there, you think about all the Office products, the SharePoint, all those online, all the online platforms, we have to comply with GDPR as well, which means we've been through this whole journey and we can help you through it.
Yep. Okay, so again, going on that security theme, one other additional thing we want to talk about, if you're not aware of what's happened in the recent version of the SQL Server, we added new features as well. Dynamic data masking, row level security, And then the one unique, powerful feature that a lot of like financial firms like Puerto Banco in Latin America, why they embraced this was this notion of being able to protect their data, while it's in transit, while it's at rest, not just only while it's at rest. Because one of the challenges that firms like this are facing is a lot of times the data is captured or stolen before it's even written to the database. So how do you solve that? So Kevin will talk about, always encrypted. Many of you may already be using it, and we'll talk about some of the enhancements as well. But Kevin, do you want to quickly explain how this technology works?
Yeah, so this is just highlighting one of the cool features we put in 2017. Always encrypted. Every database platform has some form of encryption, and usually it's encryption at rest, which means as you write the data out to the disk, you encrypt it so that it's secure out there, and if somebody steals the disks or the backups, you're safe. But that doesn't protect you from somebody getting access to the live database. What Always Encrypted does is it moves that encryption upstream into the client side. So there's a client-side library that you link into programs used to access SQL Server, and it's attached to your client app. We've enhanced that client-side library to understand encryption. So what happens here is you take your database schema, you decide that credit card number is a sensitive piece of data. I want to make sure that that gets protected. So you tag the schema for credit card number saying that this should be encrypted using this specific certificate, given the thumbprint for the certificate. The actual encryption happens upstream on the client side. So when the client library looks at that metadata, it understands the data from this column should always be encrypted. As you insert data, it gets encrypted on the client before it's ever sent to SQL Server. We can still do lookups on it because of the specific encryption methodologies that we use, but it means that the database never got to clear text data. And the only people that will ever get access to the data that are people that have been granted access to the certificates on the client side. So it also gives you person by person control over who gets access to that data. By keeping it encrypted before it ever gets to the database never had the clear text data, and that means that nobody on your operational staff can possibly compromise that data. If there's a suggestion that there may have been a breach, you've cleared your whole operations staff. You don't even have to look at them because they never had access to it. You've very firmly isolated the number of people that could possibly have leaked the data.
Yeah, so not only is useful for protecting just your customers' data, but and many of you are within IT, and you are also concerned about security within your operational staff. And this technology also, like Kevin mentioned, can enable you to basically clear your operational staff in case there is an audit on why the breach happened and what happened. Okay, so now let's move on to our cloud data services. Again, built by the same engineering team. And what you'll notice right away in summary, again, one theme is you have more choice, because this is where we're innovating. This is where our engineering team is doing their designing. And Kevin will speak to why that is. But the other part that you'll notice is, again, like we talked about in SQL Server, we're leading the benchmarks. So this should not be a surprise to any of you, because remember, the core engine of Azure SQL Database, it's exactly SQL Server. So if SQL Server is outperforming Oracle and other mission critical performing vendors, why would it not against cloud vendor or cloud services? It's the same thing. You're seeing unparalleled results in operational databases, and now with Azure Cosmos DB, you have a great scalable multi-model database that guarantees you less than 10 milliseconds of latency. So for customer facing apps, shopping cart kind of apps, retail experience is a great solution.
A really world-class NoSQL store.
Exactly. So again, more choice. Data warehousing, again, built on that same SQL engine, but now bringing in massive parallel processing, where that gives you that additional level of scale. And then again, the ability to reason over data, flexibility and choice, security and performance, even in Azure. Again, you see the results, right? We have these capabilities built in. When it comes to security and performance, Azure has more certifications than any other cloud vendor on the planet. So again, similar themes to what you saw. And why are the themes similar? Because the engineering team is building these concepts into Azure, and then what we do is, after every few cycles, bring those capabilities on premises. So Kevin, maybe I think in this slide you want to talk about this design point.
So I'll have some nuance to the way
Sure.
Romney described that. It's not so much that we innovate in Azure and then move it to the on-premise. There is only one code base. So for Azure, for SQL Server, Azure SQL Database, it's all one code base. We deploy in different modes when we're on-premise versus the cloud, much like if you load Enterprise Edition license, you get one set of behaviors. If you load Standard Edition, you get a different set. When we deploy in the cloud, it tweaks how things behave, but it's all the same code underneath. You'll see new innovations surface in Azure first, just by virtue of how fast we ship. So we refresh the bits in Azure about once a month, and new functionality can come in any of those. We have the ability to develop new functions and keep them locked down until we're satisfied that they're ready for prime time. We can give access to specific customers for them to test it out, but it's all the same code base. And then about every couple of years, we'll take the current state of the code base and ship it out to on-premise customers as a release of SQL Server. But there's no difference in the underlying technology. It's all the same. And that's the reason we have such a smooth experience between on-premise and Azure, because it's all one data platform.
Okay, so many of you might be in this cloud journey, and you're probably asking, well, how's Microsoft going to help me? I've got a bunch of SQL on premises. Yeah, I can take it to infrastructure services and manage it myself, but really I want to gain the power of the cloud and take it all the way to a fully managed service where Microsoft is not only taking care of the patching of the OS, but patching of the database, the security that's around it, really streamlining a lot of that for you. And you have that with Azure Data Migration Service. This can help you lift and shift SQL Server to VMs if you want to control and manage those, but then again, you're responsible for patching the OS, patching the database, or to a fully managed service like Azure SQL Database, where all of that is our burden and not yours, right? And you can lift and shift SQL Server as is without having to, change your application. That's the powerful thing. You don't have to rewrite. If you go try to do this with, an Oracle database, you're gonna, if it's 12c and you want to go take it to their patch service, you're gonna have to rewrite that application because there isn't a common code base. And that was a significant amount of effort from our engineering team to get to that state, so that essentially hybrid is really possible, and you get to decide where you want to deploy, right? When customers ask me, well, is a SQL Server or SQL database? My point is, we have SQL. Do you like the capabilities of SQL? Where do you want to deploy? You can deploy on-premise, your choice. You can deploy in infrastructure services and manage it yourself in a VM. You can deploy it in our PaaS service, Azure SQL Database, or you can even deploy on Edge. And so all 4 deployment models are there. You get to choose. Our job is to make it as simple as possible so that you don't have to go rewrite. If you changed your mind and you said, you know what, I started this project, Ramnik, as an on-prem project, but we're 6 months down the road, and you know what, we really have changed our mind and we want it to be cloud optimized. Am I going to have to start over with SQL? You won't have to. You can change your mind halfway through and say, I'm going to ship this to Azure SQL Database, and the overhead that we've added to you is minimal.
So the data migration service is designed to make that transition point smooth. It's one thing to decide, it's another thing to actually get there.
Yeah.
So data migration service covers all of the phases from analysis to make sure that there's no possible hangups in the way your schema is designed, moving the schema up into an Azure SQL database, transferring the structure of the database, and then moving all your data. Once your data is all up in the Azure SQL database, you can even have it in a continuous mode, which will keep your on-premise and Azure SQL database in sync until you're ready to cut over.
The other part I wanted to mention, so you see SQL Server, but that's not the only source. You can actually take open source databases like Postgres, MySQL, because we have the equivalent services in the cloud. And again, you get the benefit of our security engine, the consistency model that our engineering team is doing, that you won't just get running Postgres anywhere else. So you can lift and shift those. You can lift NoSQL databases, because Cosmos DB supports a MongoDB API. So you can take NoSQL databases, Mongo, Cassandra, and lift and shift those into Cosmos DB. So it's not limited to SQL Server, but that same service is doing all of this for you. And the scope of this service is going to expand, every release cycle, and we release more often because customers are asking us to help them migrate more things to Azure. Okay, so let's talk about what's the financial advantage, right? So we talked about the tech, but there is a significant financial advantage of lifting and shifting these SQL servers to Azure, let's say, versus Amazon, which is Azure Hybrid Benefit, which is, if many of you have software assurance on your SQL servers or your Windows server, you'll be very glad that you did that, because now you can lift and shift both SQL. If you lift and shift SQL Server to IaaS, you can combine that Azure Hybrid Benefit with the Windows Server Azure Hybrid Benefit, which will give you an 85%. So 55% for SQL, combine it with Windows Server, up to an 85% discount over Amazon. So many of you may not even realize this. You're lifting and shifting SQL Server to Amazon and going, my question to you is, did you know that you're paying 2 to 3 times more than you should be paying? And let me explain how that works. Here's the example of the benefits of Azure Hybrid Benefit in IaaS. So again, remember, you have to have software assurance for those units that you have it. This is allowed, and this you'll just see an example of the discount, right? So if you're just doing SQL Server, and let's say you deployed on Linux, well, then you wouldn't get the Windows Azure Hybrid Benefit, but you would get the SQL one, and that would get you to that 75% discount. But then you add on Windows Server, now you're at an 85% discount on that hourly rate. And so it's a significant advantage. And the more customers I talk to, the more I realize most of them don't really even know that this is there, and they're spending 80% more to run the SQL Server in Amazon and not even knowing about it. The same. Let's just keep on going. So the other cool thing here is now we've also, as you're going to be able to, lift and shift SQL Server. This is already in public preview. SQL Server to Azure SQL Database. Remember, that's a fully managed service. All of the patching, all of the security, all of that's handled by us. Uptime, SLAs, HA SLA, all are given by us, which you wouldn't have in an IaaS environment on uptime. So here you get a 55% savings if you have software assurance on-prem. So why are we doing this? Again, remember, we're designing for hybrid. We understand many of you started on-prem, or even might have a project today that you're starting on-prem and saying, you know what, maybe 6-8 months down the road, I might take this workload to the cloud. Did I just waste all that money I just spent on SQL? No, the point is, no, we're going to make you whole, and the investment you made in SQL, with software assurance, we're going to give you a credit when you move either to PaaS or IaaS. Okay. So let's start give you a quick overview of the services that we have. So Azure SQL Database is the best destination for SQL Server, and again, it's fully managed, right? You can lift and shift SQL Server applications, which you couldn't do a couple years ago, using Azure Data Migration Service. You can migrate the data marts you have on SQL Server. It's got the same code base. So again, if you want to build intelligent apps that have R and Python and things of this nature, you can do that as well.
So we talk a lot about how compatible the two platforms are, SQL Server versus Azure SQL Database, and that's true, and that's what impacts moving an application compatibility. But that doesn't speak to the richness of the Azure platform. Because we're running the platform around the database and we understand the database itself, we can monitor the performance of an application and tweak the query processing to make it more efficient. So for example, we can give you a report that says if you added these 3 indexes, your database would run 50% faster. Do you want to? Yes or no? And you can even make it automatic. But it doesn't stop there, because after it's made one of those adjustments, it continues to monitor, was this really successful? And if it's in automatic mode and it makes a change like that and realizes, oh, overall that wasn't a win, it'll back it back out and go back to the original version.
You're talking about this concept. So again, I think the concept that at the highest level that Kevin's talking about, and you'll see more and more of these capabilities. What is our engineering team trying to do? They're saying, hey, you're asking Microsoft to manage the data platform for you. How can we make it easier for you? How can we give you more intelligence? We have this technology. We're investing in AI in a big way. How can we give you more intelligence about how your data is performing, how your customer reaction times are, how the machine learning models working, so that we can make your life easier. I mean, that's the value add that you get. Why are you paying more for a PaaS service than you managing it yourself?
Where any online service is being attacked, you can just assume that. With Azure as platform as a service, we've integrated our AI capabilities into monitoring the connection requests coming in, looking for patterns that indicate an intrusion, and we can defeat the intrusions before they ever get to your database. So that's another way that our platform that can make life easier.
Yep.
And before anyone starts getting nervous about, oh, they're looking at my data, there's very concrete firewalls as to what we can see. We can look at the performance metrics of SQL Server, the equivalent of the DMVs. So we're looking at how fast did this query run, how much memory did it take. That doesn't expose any of your data. So you can't, an engineer that works on the back end can't see your data unless he has explicit permission and direction from you and for a defined purpose and period.
Yeah, I mean, like you said earlier, we're also GDPR compliant.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a must. Okay, so again, another thing I talked about, look, SQL Server is not your only lift and shift choice. If you've got MySQL, I know many more and more companies are adopting open source technologies. We've got great destinations here, and again, you get value add. The concepts that you were talking that Kevin was talking about, intelligence, security. We're bringing these same value adds to the MySQL service, the PostgreSQL service, the Cosmos DB, so that there is. So if you go, hey, well, why should I run my MySQL or Postgres in Azure versus, let's say, Amazon or somewhere else? You're getting this because engineering's building a consistent platform, right? They're saying, well, how can we apply the work that we're doing to more and more of our services in Azure versus a single product?
This also speaks to the culture shift within Microsoft that is fundamental, where it used to be, the attitude was, well, we're Microsoft, everybody should come to us. When Satya came in, he turned that upside down, and it's now the whole idea and motivation is, where are our customers? Where do our customers want to be? We'll provide them the best experience there. So now you're seeing SQL on Linux. 5 years ago, that would have been what? But now it's a product that we're shipping. So the idea is, if you want to run on Linux, fine, we'll give you the best database on Linux. If you want to run MySQL, great, we'll provide you hosted MySQL with the best experience there.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of the pillar we talked about earlier, flexibility and choice, we're truly investing in it in a very big way. Okay, so then let's talk about Azure Cosmos DB. So what's a great sign? This is very interesting. I was at a recent show and I saw a demo, and I'll just kind of quickly give you a summary of this. But this, like what SQL does for a relational database in terms of performance and security and capabilities there, Cosmos DB does for NoSQL. I mean, this thing is brilliant. And I'll give you an example. I'll just give you a 30-second example. Those of you that are in retail, and you're providing recommendations, that window of time you have to make that recommendation to that customer that's in your online store without them leaving is now down to 190 milliseconds, right? So if you think about it, most of these databases that have slower SLAs, this thing has less than 10 millisecond latency. It's multi-model, and it's guaranteed, by the way. Whereas other database services that are NoSQL services are taking 100 milliseconds or more, which gives you a smaller window to do your AI modeling. So if this database service can give you that performance, think about that window, how much bigger that window is to apply your AI models in real time and make a better recommendation. Better recommendations win. We've seen this pattern from retailers. They tell us this. So that's why they love Azure Cosmos DB. So if you're thinking about what's a great scenario for Cosmos DB, it's not just lift and shift your NoSQL, but it can do NoSQL like other NoSQL databases can do. Okay, analytics in the cloud. Again, from all the stages of analytics, from ingesting data to storing it, to prepping it, to serving it, and reporting it, Azure has great solutions, right? Azure Data Factory is the ideal solution for ingesting any kind of data. I think it can take up to 75 data sources. Azure, we already talked about Data Lake. It can store any data source, sensor data, whatever you want. Prepping data, Azure Databricks is there, that has a Spark-based engine. Azure SQL database, again, built on that SQL engine, can serve up that data, and then you have Power BI to visualize and report and give those insights to the executives in a self-service manner, unlike other competitors at a much more cost-effective price point. So when it comes to analytics in Azure, you have all the tools you need, and the nice thing is they work seamlessly together. It's not that you're using one tool and then you're going to go, well, it doesn't really work with Azure Databricks, or it doesn't work with Power BI. It does work. All of this is integrated. So just so that you get a view of analytics. But in summary, hopefully you found the session that Kevin and I delivered useful. To summarize, I want to share that this architecture that we started with is actually a design point that we're working towards. We know that most of our customers are designing towards a hybrid environment. We know your data centers, many of you will continue to, have those, but also embrace, public cloud services. And so what we're trying to do, and this is a journey that we're on, right? We're not done. We're continuing to work on this, is how do we make this experience as consistent as possible for you, from data to the infrastructure below, to the the identity management solution, to the applications that you're running on top. How do we make that experience from on-prem to Azure, using our Azure Data Services as consistent as possible, as seamless as possible? And then once you are in Azure, what are the value-added services we can provide you to make your life easier? I mean, in the simplest form, that's our roadmap. That's what we're solving for in simple terms without talking any tech.
So this is a very smooth architecture. It's a very smooth blending of the two environments, but it's more than that, because there's a solid technical architecture underneath that makes all of this concrete reality. It's not just fluff on the top. It's a solid technical solution.
Yep, and it's one of the reasons I have Kevin join me in these sessions, just to share with you that this is not just a marketing speak, this is engineering reality. This is the design point that Kevin works towards, and he's actively working in our engineering team designing these solutions for you. So with that, I think we have a few minutes left. So thank you again for joining us this morning, and really appreciate your time, and hopefully you found this session useful. Kevin, anything else from you? No? Okay. So with that, we'll hand it back to Crystal.
Thanks, guys. There are a couple of questions in the chat if you guys want to go through some really quickly. You guys got time to answer some questions?
Have time. I'm not seeing the chat.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not seeing it on our side. So maybe if we can.
I can just read them off for you guys. No problem. There's a question from Sakar. How is it always encrypted different from using TDE and SQL instance level of SSL for in-transit encryption with encrypt equals true on the client connection?
That's a good question. TDE encrypts the data at rest. So within the engine, the data is all in the clear. As we write pages out to disk, that's when it gets encrypted. And as the page gets read into memory, it gets decrypted. So all the time that it's within the database engine, it's in the clear. And SSL does encrypt and secure the channel, the transport channel. So for that period that it's on the wire, it's protected. What's different is that the data within the database engine is encrypted with always encrypted, which means that if someone that doesn't have permission to access that data looks at it, they can look up the contents of that column, but all they'll get is the ciphertext. With TDE and SSL, that would not be the case, because you would protect the real text coming across the channel, but once it's read into the engine, it's in plain text and anybody can query it.
Second question.
All right, and there's another question from Janesh. Janesh wants to know, why are organizations adopting MySQL and Oracle as compared to MS SQL?
So we're actually seeing, so a different pattern. So I can tell you, being on the marketing sales side of the house, the number of migrations that we're doing, Oracle migrations to SQL, has more than doubled, and it continues to do that pattern. Right, so we're actually seeing more and more customers standardizing on SQL Server instead of Oracle, and part of the reason is, 5 years ago, when it came to mission critical workloads, the customers were, like, hey, there is no alternative to Oracle performance. Well, that's no longer true, right? But now they're doing benchmarks against SQL, and SQL is outperforming Oracle in mission critical workloads. So they're seeing an alternative, and then they're seeing the cost advantage. So those are the two reasons why customers are migrating off of Oracle. And so that's the pattern. On MySQL, again, not every workload requires that performance, or it's you have NoSQL data, and
or it may be a company that has a history with NoSQL or Oracle, and they're moving on with that. Maybe their staff is trained in that technology. So there's a lot of reasons why people would stand up a new project in other technologies. We want to make it as comfortable as possible to move to Microsoft technology and platform. And if that means that they stay with MySQL on Azure, that's okay too.
Okay, so we're at time, and I think we can close the session at this point, Crystal.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys so much for coming on and doing the session for us. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
And for everyone else, you guys will receive a recording of this, and it will be up on the website tomorrow. And if you have any further questions, just feel free to reach out to us. Thanks so much for joining.